S3a Lee, who is the star of Kill Bill, and he's talking on how Twin Cities light rail is harming the bus riders. Now I'm told that from Randall at least there has been a real thorn on the side of these great advocates. He's an expert at really asking them those difficult questions and probing to get this sort of information. So I'm sure she has a lot to pass on to it. While she's just arranging her notes, I have to say that I have found that the presumption you make when you're looking at any report that comes out of the smart growth transit bureaucracy, you should start with the presumption that the books are cooked. And it's very difficult for us to take that view because we tend to respect science and think that people wouldn't deliberately do this. That maybe they tended to take the low or the high or whatever. But in every time I've looked in closely, I have found deliberate corruption. Yeah, so if they don't like the results, they'll take out what they call the outriders until they get the result. So always assume corrupt reporting. It's extraordinary.
The Women's League of Voters is a political organization, and I tried to get on a bond oversight, transit bond oversight. And I put my name in, and the Women's League of Voters said that they had somebody better qualified. And I said, what have they got to do with it? Well, their name is on the bond issue. They get to appoint the oversight.
All yours.
Did everyone get one?
Not me.
Excuse me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I was going to talk about some of the, I guess, blatant numbers about the cost effectiveness of light rail transit, and figuring, as our previous speaker mentioned, that the process that went on his city may be somewhat analogous to going on other cities, that these figures may be similar to what you're finding, and I found some of them in the types of documents you mentioned, though you know of ones that I haven't seen. There is a light rail line going from downtown Minneapolis south to the Mall of America, which is near this hotel. It's 12 miles and it's 17 stations. When they first went, and the four areas I'm going to cover are cost, capacity, convenience, and congestion. And it's partly because I liked having the four C's. When they went to the legislature, they mentioned a cost of $400 million. But they didn't mention that they weren't having the line go into the core of downtown, just at the eastern edge. So then they added that, and then they added something else, and then they said, oh, our dollars are not in today's dollars. There were, so finally, after going, I think to 400 million and 548 million and 645 million, and then it was officially 715 million, and they said it was on time and on budget. But I noticed that actually, this is tomorrow will be the 1-year anniversary. They were telling everyone to go ride it to celebrate. That although it's officially 715 million, they're already $6.3 million over budget, because they said, oh, we're having such success with riders that we don't have enough time to pull the cars off and do maintenance. We have to pay mechanics overtime, and that's adding to our operating costs. So in other words, they ordered less spares than they really needed just to get the cost within the 715 million. And now they're coming back and buying 3 more cars, one of which I guess is being paid out of the $715 million. But the other 2 is an additional $6.3 million. The $715 million does not include $21 million for utility relocation of electrical lines and telephone lines, and I think there's some other lines underneath the street in downtown Minneapolis. And the local electrical company sued and lost to try to get those costs recovered. It does not include a $36 million airport tram. It was claimed all along that light rail was serving the airport and serving the Mall of America. But in the original plans, when it was $645 million, it didn't actually quite go to the Mall of America, went near it. I think about 2 football fields or 3 football fields away, and it could not quite get up to the terminal. And so they built this tram, and then they claimed, oh, we're having a transit center and all the airport limousines and everything, the buses can go to the transit center, but the real reason was they couldn't get light rail up to the terminal because it was 7 stories underground, and the ventilation tunnels took up too much space to get it, to route it there. And it also doesn't include a $16.4 million go-to computerized fares collection system. They want to have the cards, I think, similar to what you have on elevators or parking ramps. And that was partly because with light rail, they were wanting people to transfer onto buses, but with the amount of people coming off light rail, they were afraid they wouldn't be able to load on the buses quick enough. And then the newspaper, I read that also the system they've been using, which is magnetic stripe, that the machines don't work that well in our cold weather. So the thing that brought the $645 million up to $715 million was to extend the line all the way to the Mall of America. Instead of having 2 football fields away, have to go up into a skyway and then go across and then go back down again. They're going to extend it, but while for the bus it was a simple matter, the buses were already going to the Mall of America. They were just driving there. For light rail, here's the Holiday Inn and here's Mall of America, and light rail was going to drive here. Well, the bus just drove in the Mall of America. The light rail was going to go down that way, that way, that way, that way, and that way. It added, I think, points about half a mile routing. And I think that's because they didn't want it to block the Mall of America traffic going to the parking ramp. Anyway, the last $39.9 million, of that, $30 million came from federal money that was going to have been used to buy 78 buses. So when they claim here over and over again, oh, it doesn't hurt the bus system, well, they already took money away from buses. And then I mentioned to you that the official cost is $715 million on budget. So the original budget was $400 million. It's actually $721.3 million because there's more rail cars. The newspapers and the business organizations are supporting building light rail between downtown St. Paul and downtown Minneapolis. Originally, that was the first choice because of higher ridership than Hiawatha. But then they built Mall of America, so then there was a destination. And there was neighborhood opposition to having light rail on University Avenue, partly because of the amount of parking taken. So I was at a meeting a few months ago, and I asked, well, what about this parking? And they were sort of vague. Well, due to the gentleman sitting in the second row there, I was inspired to go read the draft, Bruce Garter, environmental impact statement. And lo and behold, even though they didn't answer my question at the meeting, they had it spelled out that, let's see if I can.
40% of the.
Yeah, they would take away 40% along the business area of the street and over half of the on-street parking of the state capitol, so people like, well, except I take the bus. Well, people like Bruce would have trouble testifying because there'd be a shortage of on-street parking, and then over 100 spots in downtown St. Paul. So the reasons for the neighborhood opposition, there hasn't been very much now, but the reasons are still in place, though not out in the open, because perhaps they figure no one's going to read the document that thick, environmental impact, draft environmental impact statement. Anyway, the other thing they keep claiming is, well, we'll build the first line. The second line will be less. That's what they said about North Star, which hasn't been built, the commuter rail line. The second line will be less because the yards and shops will be included in the first line. Well, no. Central corridor between the 2 downtowns has an estimated cost of $840 million. They're very open about that, but they don't ever seem to remember about them saying that the second line would cost less. The Hiawatha operating costs, actually I've seen 2 different figures, but in the ballpark, I've seen 18 million, and then I've also seen 11 million. The Central Corridor estimated operating costs by the time that it would open, also 17 million. But there is this interesting document, the Transit 2020 Master Plan, which was given to members of the Senate Transportation Committee in the 2000 legislative session. and I think also to the House Transportation Committee. I can't be sure, but it was given to one. And in the last 2 pages of that document, not in part 1, the executive summary, but in part 2, the actual document, they give the figure that the cost to double the Twin Cities bus system capacity, including garages, park and rides, and other related facilities, plus doubling the fleet, by the year 2010, would cost $440 million, with additional operating costs of $70 million a year. So that's like this stupendous bargain compared to light rail. And I've used that figure sometimes trying to write legislators. It's hard to know who will be an opponent, so I wrote sort of a broadcast letter, but then they get so much mail, I don't know who ever read it. But the figure didn't seem to make too much of a dent on anyone. In addition, the same document, the Transit 2020 Regional Master Plan, which we used to have in PDF form on the Metro Council website, it not only withdrawn it from the website, but it's no longer available at the Document Center, which is where you can get public documents, some free and some for charge, from the Metropolitan Council. And they said, well, it's been superseded by this other document. The cost to construct 125 miles of bus-only shoulders in 12 different locations by 2010, $104 million, and no additional operating costs beside that earlier mentioned $17 million. We compare $17 million to double the size of the bus system versus $70 million versus 17 or 18. You just end up building 4 light rail lines, which I'll mention later, don't do anything more than 4 bus routes would do, and you spend as much money as if you doubled the service in the metro area. Now, for this $715 million, what do you get? I've been at meeting after meeting where they say, oh, it's so cheap to operate, or one operator can carry 500 people in a 3-car train. Well, they don't mention how many are seated, and I prefer to use the seating capacity, because how can you talk about the side of your mouth capacity, and on the other side of your mouth, how comfortable the ride is if your ride is a cattle car ride. So, this light rail has 24 seats with 60 seats each for 1,584 seats total. The 3 more cars would bring it up to 1,782 seats. And the Central Corridor light rail will have a similar number. Well, this is like hardly any capacity you're buying for an incredible amount of money, because according to something I just got from the data center this week, they said that Metro Transit has 851 buses. So the buses vary. Some have as many seats as a light rail car, 66. Some have only about 37 because they're the ones with 66 seats are the longer articulated buses. Some have 37 seats. The most common buses have 43 seats. So trying to use a conservative number, I used 40. So the current fleet has over 34,000 seats, and that's the capacity you could have added. Every time you build a light rail line, you are sacrificing all that capacity. You could have bought 19 times the capacity of Hiawatha light rail for 61% of the cost, or instead of buying 5%, approximately 1/20th the capacity for like 1 2/3 of the cost. So, and then if you add the Central Corridor and Hiawatha together, then it looks even worse, because you're spending money that you could have almost added, added more than 3 bus systems. You could have quadrupled the bus system capacity on a capital cost basis for the cost of the 2 light rail lines, but then again, you're only getting 26 more cars with 66 seats each. I mean, these figures cannot be disputed. Some other figures like speed or pollution, they could say, oh, we didn't estimate right. These are solid figures, but somehow you would think it would impress people. And then I give some cost per seat for expanding capacity, and for Hiawatha it's over $400,000, and for the spending on doubling the bus system would be $12,000. Why, when driver can carry so many people, because if you have a two-car train, which I think is our maximum, seated 66 plus 66 people versus 43 on a bus, why does someone like me claim that it costs more to run? Because those 27 cars have almost 149 full-time equivalent employees, which is a greater proportion to the capacity or to the number of vehicles than the bus. I put the figure down there. The transportation choices, which, let's see, where is he? Oh, which you mentioned, I didn't know it was a nationwide thing. They were proposing a $225 million a year tax increase here. And to people that have not yet been saddled with light rail, I've said this for years, probably the past 10 years, that the most important thing in fighting light rail is to prevent dedicated funding. I read about the case of Dallas. The voters turned down a light rail bill, but then they went and approved a half-cent sales tax. And so once you have that $225 million a year, you're home free because you can do whatever you want, because you don't have to go back to the legislature anymore. Right now, they have to go and get permission for the legislature to issue bonds from state money, or Met Council has to go to the legislature for permission to issue its own bonds, which are paid through property tax of the Met Council taxing district. So the capital cost is higher, even when you say that the light rail cars last longer. The operating cost is higher because there are many mechanics needed to service it. The capacity is incredibly small for the amount of money you're spending, and so there's an opportunity cost, a lost opportunity cost, that when you spend that much money, you don't have the capacity to spend it on something that would bring more capacity and service. As far as convenience, to two people, light rail is very inconvenient. It's been running a year, and one automobile driver and one pedestrian have been killed, and I think they sort of attributed to the fault of both. The driver was over 80 and he had glaucoma, and even his son said he probably shouldn't have been driving. The pedestrian, they said, had acute and chronic alcoholism. He apparently looked at the train and was trying to decide whether to cross and made the wrong decision. But the thing about light rail versus a bus, because I've been on buses where they sort of screeched to a stop because some person was trying to challenge the bus and purposely run in front of it. I thought, well, it's not smart because a bus can't stop like a bicycle or something. The light rail train can't swerve, and its inability to go around the way that a bus can leads to many, many other limitations. The Star Tribune parking lot where you mentioned Lori Blake, where Lori Blake works, they had to acquire that in order that light rail could go diagonally across the block instead of turning the corner like the bus had been doing. And because of the inability to swerve and because of its enormous weight, 107,000 pounds per car, per rail car, light rail needs its own dedicated 2 lanes, which I think mean that wherever it goes, it's like you have to find space for a 2-lane road by either taking parking lanes or driving lanes. On University Avenue, where Central Corridor would run,
Excuse me, Lisa.